The clock indicated 8 a.m., and immediately the alarm clock went off. The guy definitely had a lightning-fast reaction, as he immediately turned off the alarm clock, not dancing to the sound of the alarm clock in his sleep. However, the morning was not good for the guy, so his head was just splitting. The guy's name is Su Yi. After standing up and feeling the headache at full force, he makes a vow to himself. No matter how important the client was, there was no need to drink so much. It doesn't matter how much alcohol he puts into himself. Far more important is the fact that he will be able to close the deal or not. He promises himself to remember that he needs to be able to work the next day, because waking up with this condition the next day is simply unbearable. As he was putting on his slippers, he suddenly heard a sound as if he had stepped into a puddle. And it was for good reason, because he found that his floor was all wet. He even wondered if he hadn't closed the faucet yesterday. After checking the faucets and pipes, he found that everything was fine. Since he lives on the top floor, he could not have been flooded from above in any way. From myself, I will add that the logic is strange, and from the roof cannot leak, only if the neighbors or something. In the end, remembering that he has nothing valuable, he decides to ventilate the room first and deal with the rest after he gets back from work. However, when he pulled the curtains apart to open the window, he was met with a rather shocking sight that made him stand in a pillar looking out the window. There was water outside the window that practically reached his apartment on the top floor. He was on the highest floor and realized how such a thing was even possible. He even thought that he had really had too much to drink last night, and that was why he was dreaming all sorts of things today. But when he slowly loosened his fingers a little, the picture did not change at all, and everything was the same as the first time. He even recoiled and slipped a little, because it was not a hallucination or a dream. Now he realized why the entire floor of his apartment was in water. He'd had so much to drink last night that he hadn't even noticed the whole city had gone under water. He managed to get out of the apartment and into the hallway, and he headed for the next door. He started knocking on the door to see if anyone was home, but no one answered. But suddenly the door was open. Looking inside, he found that none of the neighbors were there and their dog was also missing. Looking at the instant noodles, mapo tofu, and water on the table, he notes that it looks like a flood really did hit the city during the night. He should definitely be working as a detective. He realizes from the food left behind that as soon as the neighbors knew what was happening, they desperately rushed to escape, knocking over the noodles, forgetting to put on their shoes and closing the door. And because he's been sleeping rough since last night's corporate dinner, he concludes that he's all alone in staying here while the others have left the building. But then he notices something odd about the whole affair. Even if his neighbors escaped yesterday, then how come there was such a layer of dust on the table? When he put his hands on the table, he discovered this. Besides, the food couldn't have spoiled so quickly. He also doesn't understand one thing. Is it even possible for the most powerful flood to inundate an entire city in a miserable half a day? Then he pulled out his cell phone and found that there was no connection. Trying to contact the emergency service by dialing 110, he also found that this option did not work. And that's what really scared the guy. He starts to look lost and frustrated, as if help isn't coming, and comes to realize that it looks like he's the only one left here. But his skills haven't gone to waste. So he picked himself up. He has no idea what to do, but inaction is definitely not his option. Elevator doesn't seem to be working. The stairs are flooded too. The water got this high. He crouches down and decides to touch the water, but suddenly the water bubbled and gave a sign that clearly did not bode well. It seems that something started to show out of the water, and the guy, like in horror movies, asks who is there. The head of a seemingly beautiful girl emerged from the water. But then the head and body floated up, and the guy saw a very creepy picture of what had become of the poor girl. He recognized the girl. It was the girl who lived on the 25th floor. The protagonist notices that the corpse is already bloated. The girl's arm had been nibbled by someone, and if it was some kind of fish. But horrible thoughts began to enter his head. Perhaps it was someone else, someone more intimidating. Sui decided not to check what was waiting for him, but first decided to look around and gather what he had. The first thing that was most important was food. He also managed to gather some tools that would serve as weapons in case of emergency. He was also able to find clean and dry clothes. And, importantly, a source of fire. Sui decided to imagine that he was on a deserted island, so he had a limited supply of things and supplies. After looking over everything he has, he thought about his escape plan. As an option, he could stay and wait for rescue. Also in this option, he can climb on the roof and set fire to some junk in order to signal with smoke. Also, in parallel, he will need to go through the neighbors and see if they have some supplies. Then he'll have to hope for luck. He will either be rescued or everything will go completely underwater. There is also another option, to make a raft. When he uses up 70% of his supplies, he will have nothing left but to take a risk and try to get out on a raft in search of rescue. He decides to start by building a fire on the roof and takes some books to do so, and that now he has only to trust to fate. However, when he opened the door, what he saw did not make him too happy, as he noticed footprints. He thought he might not be the only survivor. Someone had climbed the stairs and entered his neighbor's apartment. Suyi doesn't understand how the person got in, considering that the stairs are flooded. Taking a knife in one hand and a hammer in the other, the guy decided to find out what's up. He opened the neighbor's door and, again like a character from a horror movie, asked if anyone was alive. He heard a noise and realized that there was indeed someone inside. However, if it was a person, then why didn't he answer him? But then from around the corner, something that looked like a person but was not a person appeared. And then this monster attacked the guy and showed its teeth. Suyi didn't want to be in the creature's mouth, so he pushed it away with his foot. However, the creature didn't think of stopping and rushed towards the guy again. But the guy was already prepared and was fully armed and hit the creature on the head with his hammer. Suyi is surprised. It looks like there are zombies in the world. He only wonders if this mutation is related to the flood that happened. Suddenly, the monster he hit with the hammer shines, and in front of the guy, as if out of nowhere, appeared some sign on which was inscribed, Spiritual Source 1 of 5. The guy doesn't understand what it is at all, and what else is a spiritual source. But his musings were interrupted as something flew into him, glowing with blue energy. Looking at his hand, he had a sensation as if he had something absorbed. This led him to think that perhaps he had earned a unit of this source by destroying that zombie. Apparently the source was having an effect on his body, as the spot he had bruised no longer hurt. This kind of fatigue hit, and he felt a peculiar surge of energy. As he swung the hammer, he even noticed his strength had increased. Suyi once again looked at the monster that had almost eaten him a while ago. Then he grabbed the zombie's leg and dragged it behind him, coming to the conclusion that the world had become a completely different place. Some kind of sinister dead, an incomprehensible and mysterious spirit source. In terms of common sense, he could not explain what was happening. He brought it to the stairwell, where he found the neighbor last time, and threw the zombie into the water. He doesn't understand what happened to that woman, whether the changes were accidental or imminent. If all the corpses look like her, then the town has become an extremely dangerous place. As he watches the zombie drown, he ponders just how many people died in the flood, guessing probably millions. At least he knows for sure that staying here he is not safe, and he needs to get in touch with the rescuers as soon as possible. Suyi gathers all sorts of junk for a signal fire, and then goes up to the roof and brings it all up. Looking at the view from the roof, he wonders how big the flood must have been if the aftermath was so terrible. The one next door has 30 floors too, so he wonders if there are survivors like himself there too. Either way, he should find out soon enough. So he builds a fire on the roof, out of the junk he's dragged in, so that he can be spotted by the rescuers. He notes that if there are any survivors nearby, they might react upon seeing the thick smoke rising from the roof of his house. The smoke from the fire was quite heavy. You could see for miles around that smoke. However, a whole half hour passed, but nothing happened during that time. This was to be expected. As he descends from the roof, he remembers that he has enough food supplies for about 4 days. However, as he stopped on his floor, he noticed something unpleasant. He clearly remembered when he first came to this place that the water did not reach the 30th floor. But now somehow the entire flight of stairs has been flooded, and the water is still rising. And that means it's no longer safe to stay on the 30th floor. He needs to build a raft as soon as possible, because no one knows what fate will have in store for him. After some time, he manages to build a raft. According to the guy's estimates, made of several door frames, a bed frame, and a couple of crates, the raft should be able to hold up to 300 kilograms. And he built such a perfect raft, because for his luck and good fortune, in his student days he participated in boat races. How convenient. If he also made a paddle, he could swim to the next building. He decided to use a clothes hanger as a paddle, but then he sees another zombie who used to be a man. This makes him think that he didn't think about it before, because maybe not all of the victims become zombies. He keeps the hammer in his hand, as long as the water level allows, that he decides to take the opportunity to test his theory in practice. The guy took out a stick with a hammer and tried to poke a zombie floating by with it. The zombie immediately cried out, which scared the poor guy a lot. However, the zombie immediately began to sink. When the zombie sinks to the depths, you can see that it looks like it is braided by some tentacles, like a kraken. The man was frightened by what he saw, and he was going to float his raft after all. So there's something else in the water besides all these dead people. He remembers that the corpse of that woman from the 25th floor had some signs of having been eaten. Eventually, he sits down in a puddle with no energy, working so hard on the raft, thinking of a way to get out of here as soon as possible. But what he's seen now has discouraged him from even trying. But staying here wasn't an option for him either, because he had enough food for 4 days at most, not to mention the fact that the water level was constantly rising and all those zombies around. And right after he said that, they started knocking on his apartment. So he jinxed himself. He walked slowly and cautiously to the door and then carefully looked through the peephole. There he found another dead man who was already knocking on the neighboring apartment. The guy notices that the zombie has a broken leg, but it's a zombie, so Su-yi isn't sure if it will affect his movement speed at all. Su-yi decides not to wait and jumps out of the apartment with a hammer. This zombie will get to him sooner or later anyway, so the guy decides to attack first. If his assumptions turn out to be correct, he will get a bonus for it. So he destroys the zombies. Once again, a sign lights up and informs him that he already has Spiritual Source 2 out of 5. Su-yi feels his power has increased again. He is glowing. The situation is that by killing zombies and increasing the Spiritual Source value, he is getting stronger. Since his abilities are increasing, there may be hope that he will be able to resist the creatures that are hiding in the water, so he has a chance to get out of here. But he doesn't fully understand what 2 out of 5 Spiritual Source means. Since he has 2 out of 5, what happens if he scores all 5? But then a chill ran down his skin as there was a sudden noise. It turns out that another zombie snuck in through the bedroom window. The guy notes that this dead man was able to climb through the window. The strength of the dead man was clearly superior to the ones he had destroyed before and the ones he had met before. But Su-yi has no other choice. He must destroy this zombie at all costs. So he grabs a hammer and attacks the zombie. Will he be able to kill this zombie as easily as the others or not? However, his fears were not in vain, as the reinforced zombie easily blocks the attack by grabbing the hammer by the handle. Su-yi notices that the monster in front of him is much stronger and more agile than the one he met before. If the guy hadn't gotten the second spiritual source and his strength hadn't increased, then in that case he would hardly have any chance of standing at all. Su-yi snatched the hand with the hammer from the monster's clutches and swung his right leg with all his might. However, the zombie did not move at all, and only looked at the slipper foot he had on his stomach with annoyance. Su-yi noticed that his matters were not good, for these monsters seemed to be unafraid of pain. The zombie snapped the guy out of his musings, sending him flying with a sweep of his left arm. The guy punched the door with his body, which shattered into pieces, and also knocked over things that were drying. Thus he found himself in a heap of things. Barely on his feet, he thought he was having trouble with his ribs, and it looked like he had a fracture. Looking at the zombie that was already walking in his direction, he was already annoyed. Was he really going to die like this? However, when the monster was very close, the guy decided that he would not die here. He wanted to stay alive. Grabbing one of his clothes from the pile of clothes, he threw it on the floor in front of him. When the zombie was already too close and stepped on the clothes, Su-yi yanked it towards him with force. This caused the monster to slip and start falling. However, the guy's plan was to hit the monster with the hammer during this fall, which he successfully pulled off. The plan was executed perfectly. Apparently, the zombie doesn't have a good mind but only instincts, so Su-yi was able to defeat it, and it remained lying on the floor and didn't get up again. The guy breathed a sigh of relief, because not long ago, he could have lost his life. The system notification that the spiritual source had reached 3 out of 5. His entire body glowed. Su-yi felt like the spiritual spring had a healing power. If it didn't, he would definitely die right now, considering his broken ribs. Meanwhile, a couple more zombies decided to sneak in through the open window. They didn't wait and ponder their attack and launched a frontal attack on the guy. Su-yi didn't hesitate this time either and immediately struck the first zombie with his hammer. The first zombie fell dead. However, the second zombie quickly shortened the distance and attacked the guy. While holding back the zombie with his left hand and preventing the top from getting too close, Su-yi gave a final hammer blow to the second zombie. He had successfully defeated 3 zombies, and not long ago, he was afraid to attack the first one. A system notification popped up, because he had scored a spiritual source of 5 out of 5, which meant that he had been upgraded. He was now a rank 1 spiritual source. For the next rank upgrade, he already needed 10 pieces of spiritual source. Su Yi felt a surge of strength and became radiant. His level had increased after he had collected 5 sources, and according to the system, he was now a rank 1 spiritual source. The system didn't stop there and gave him a difficult choice. It offered an enhancement, but it was a stomach or lung enhancement. In this flooded world, the increased volume of the lungs would be a distinct advantage. Therefore, almost without thinking, Su Yi decides to choose the lungs. After accepting the guy's answer, the system proceeded to improve the lungs. Achievement: strong lungs of the first type. It seemed to be a monstrous pain. After all, it didn't happen painlessly and magically. The lungs actually began to seem to pump up to the required level. At some point it finally stopped, and the guy opened his eyes. He could really feel that the volume of his lungs had increased compared to what it was before. He could now hold his breath for at least 3 minutes. Thanks to this, he once again had hope for salvation. Looking at the system once again, he searched for positive thoughts. If he collected 10 spiritual sources, he would get another boost. In that case, his chances of getting out of this place would increase. Looking at the broken window, he concluded that this room was no longer livable. Luckily for him, the neighboring room was open, so he could spend the night there. Finally, he had a plan and a determined look, for he had made up his mind that after the next improvement, he would escape from this place. Darkness covered everything around him. Suddenly, he fell under the water. Become stronger. The words he could hear. Su Yi didn't understand what was even going on here, or if he was really drowning. He was sinking deeper and deeper, and there were no options to escape. However, as if out of nowhere, a giant-sized hand appeared. Su Yi landed on that hand, and once again, those words about him having to become stronger. Su Yi was shocked as he saw the glowing eyes and the huge hooded figure whose hand he landed on. Su Yi decided to ask who appeared before him. However, the giant informed that he was waiting for Su Yi here. The guy wanted to say something else, but he suddenly began to gasp for air as if his oxygen had run out and he couldn't breathe underwater. At the same instant, he abruptly jumped up on his bed and sat up. He didn't realize what was now before his eyes, or whether it was a dream. And while he was thinking about what had happened, a giant shadow came over him. When he turned around, he saw some kind of creature in the window, a monster with one huge eye. The creature was ugly in appearance. It was as if its body was covered in some kind of miasma. The end of its tongue was swollen and green, as if some kind of disease had befallen it. Su Yi thought that perhaps this monster was the one who had nibbled the corpse, and that his only chance of getting out of this place alive was to defeat this beast. However, he wasn't sure about anything. Therefore, he decided to wait, get some more spiritual source, and get stronger, and then already lure out and finish off this monster. But it seems something went wrong, and the guy was too much surprised by it. The strange monster did not sit back and wait for his fate. He decided to forcefully break through the window and eat the guy. Su Yi wasn't too happy about this turn of events, so he immediately grabbed the hammer. The creature jumped back into the water at the same moment. However, it wasn't going to leave and abandon the guy at all. Therefore, the strange frog-like creature jumped out and tried its best to break through the window. The guy rushed towards the window. Su Yi tried to hold back the already cracked window with his own strength. However, he was not a fool, and immediately realized that the windows would not last long at this rate. From the left side of the monster, just behind the eye, some green glow began to emanate. But the monster did not allow the guy to properly consider and again plunged into the water. A moment later, the monster's head and body reappeared out of the water. Just like last time, it wasn't some kind of trick, and the monster was gaining strength to jump. It broke through the window with force, and there was no way Su Yi could hold his position any longer. The monster's strength was too great for him. He didn't even think that he could live to deal with it somehow. But did he really have a choice? So, already in his favorite manner, grabbing his hammer, the guy lunged at the monster. The monster, however, was not going to help the guy and give up so easily. Therefore, he easily threw the guy with his painful tongue into the closet. The cursed frog sneaked straight into the building, and Su Yi lay helplessly on the floor, for he didn't feel equal to this monster. However, just lying down and dying was definitely not something this guy could understand. Su Yi grabbed a piece of glass from the window and threw it at the overgrown frog. However, the mutant easily brushed the glass away as if it were an inflatable balloon. When he decided to return to the guy again, there was no one in the guy's place. Su Yi could only hope for the cramped space of the bathroom. While the guy was hiding, the monster kept searching for him and trying to figure out where the guy had gone. The search didn't last long, and the monster quickly found the guy, breaking through the wall in the process. Su Yi did not cowardly stand aside, arming himself with more than just a hammer. He once again threw himself at the monster in the narrow space. Even though he didn't know what the monster was, he decided that the monster should pay for trespassing on private property. So he launched a chopping blow with all his might. This chopping blow was delivered to the monster's most unprotected spot, right in its only eye. The monster wailed monstrously from the pain it had just been inflicted with. Suddenly, however, everything went quiet, and the color of the eye changed its color. The guy didn't wait for long and immediately delivered another chopping blow, for he needed to finish off the monster. Su Yi was finally able to exhale. This was dangerous. Just one mistake, and he could say goodbye to his life. Immediately, a system notification appeared and said that the guy already had 8 spiritual sources out of 10. He was surprised that he had gotten 2 spiritual sources for killing that mutated frog. Once again, his body was infused with healing energy. As he approached the monster, he noticed that his strength had increased again and that it would be easier to kill the frog now. Suddenly, the frog's eye shone with a blue light. A blue ball separated from the frog's eye. The guy was both shocked and bewildered as the balloon flew straight towards him. The balloon flew towards the guy and settled on his forehead. Su Yi still didn't realize what was happening. He thought that this eye was also a spiritual source. However, he immediately brushed it aside as it seemed like something else. The system, of course, immediately told the guy what was going on. He had received an incomplete peeping rune. The ability gives you the ability to spy on spirit beasts and get basic information about them. The skill is capable of evolving to a third eye with unknown abilities. Even though Su Yi had to take a risk, but he felt that it was worth it. Not only did he obtain a spiritual source, but also a new ability. He recalled that according to the system, rune could be used to obtain information about spiritual beasts. Looking at the frog, he assumes it fits that description. So without thinking long, he uses the peeping rune. The mark on its forehead instantly glowed and responded. Looking at the frog with the rune, he recognized it as a Cyclops frog. The Cyclops frog is a member of the elite group of rank 1 spirit beasts. It feeds on inferior corporeal animals. Cruel temperament. Once spotting prey will never back down. Can evolve into the king of Cyclops frogs. High probability of getting the special skill peeping rune for killing it. That's how he finds out that the frog is actually an elite monster. Therefore, Su Yi wondered, what is the mechanism of skill enhancement of this monster? It was a strange day for him. First came a flood that inundated the entire city. Then some zombies started wandering around. Then there was some strange spiritual spring. In his world at this moment, incredible changes were taking place. What once could be called common sense had no meaning at this moment. Looking out the window, he only pondered that life and death were not toys. The difficulties he faced could not hold him back. After all, he was determined that he absolutely had to get out and find out what was really going on outside. Meanwhile, the 3rd day of the flood had arrived. The rules of the world have changed, so Su Yi needs to get as much spiritual source as possible. So taking a hammer, he went in search of the remaining zombies. After finding another monster, he kicked the door with his foot, thus sending the zombie flying. Only by adapting to the conditions and becoming stronger would he be able to survive in this new world. Arriving at the room where he fought the frog yesterday, he found many zombies devouring the mutated frog. To find out who they were, he once again decided to use the peeping rune. After looking at the zombies with the rune, the guy discovered that they were walking corpses of a lower rank. They have a certain probability of evolving by devouring their own kind. There was no other information he could discover. This entire sight caused the guy to smile. After all, it was all very timely. as he needed 2 more spiritual sources to gather the needed 10 pieces. Decisively jumping on the 2 zombies that were closest to him, he destroyed them. The system immediately responded to these actions and reported that Su Yi had collected the required 10 spiritual source pieces. The guy couldn't hide his smile as it all worked out rather quickly. The system started improving, and the guy once again shone with a bluish light. The system reported that he had obtained the 2nd rank of spiritual source. In order to evolve, he already needed 20 spiritual source. Su Yi already had a basic enhancement, Type 1 strong lungs, as well as a special skill, Peeping Rune, incomplete skill. After obtaining a rank 2 spiritual source, the system offered him another tempting choice, and this time there were already 3 options. The system offered him to strengthen his Type 1 lungs, strengthen his stomach, and strengthen his muscles. The zombies that he had not yet dealt with looked at him cautiously, but they did not attack him yet. Su Yi thought about an important choice. With reinforced lungs, he would be able to hold his breath for at least 4 minutes. However, in the water, he could encounter something bloody awful, and they would be of no use. After weighing the pros and cons, he decided to opt for muscle strengthening. The system reported basic strengthening, Type 1 muscle mass gain. Muscles are strengthened, strength is increased, muscle control is improved, and strength is improved. Suddenly, the muscles on his body started to pummel, as if Su Yi was working out at the gym right now. But it was as fast as if he believed in those courses about getting pumped up in a day, only here it was even faster. His strength had increased dramatically now, just like his ability to control his own body. He could feel every muscle in his body. He could now use this skill for full self-defense. Seeing the zombie rushing towards him, Su Yi decided to try out his new body and muscles. He swung and hit the monster with his hammer with all his might. Even so, he was barely able to calculate the force and was barely able to stand on his feet at all. Nothing was holding him back now, and he decided to try his hammer blows and more on the other zombies that were still intact. Looking at his hands, he marveled at the power he now possessed. Now he wasn't as helpless as before. However, looking at all the defeated zombies, he noticed something strange. He didn't get a single spiritual source from them. Sighing, he thought that apparently the level of these monsters wasn't high enough. Fortunately, he had obtained a ranked 2nd spiritual source, so it was time to step out of the shadows and stop hoping for something. It was time to build a raft and get out of this place. After constructing a small raft and putting everything he needed in it that he could use later, he set off on the raft towards the neighboring house. Even this short distance between the houses scared him a bit. Grabbing the bricks he had brought with him from the last house, he threw them at the window. This helped him get into the house quite easily. It was even surprising how much all the glass shattered. Looking through the window into the room that looked like someone's workplace, Su Yi found that there didn't seem to be any danger. Jumping in through the window, he immediately discovered what a thick layer of dust was in the room. It was exactly the same as his neighbors. It looked like no one had picked on this place in a long time. Exiting the room, he found himself in another. The smell was musty, which made him think that no one had lived in this apartment for a long time. Looking in the refrigerator, he was a little disappointed because all the food was rotten. Perhaps the inhabitants of this apartment had managed to get out of here. However, at the same instant, behind one of the rooms, he thought he could smell the stinking odor of blood. Su Yi decided to take a look to see what really happened there. It seemed that his hopes that the residents of this apartment had been saved had been shattered. All these people had turned into the walking dead, and then someone had killed them. The guy wondered who was able to do that. In his heart, hope began to flow in his heart again, that maybe there was someone just like him surviving and hiding in this house. He decided to use the peeping rune to look into the matter. After examining the bodies with the rune, he noticed that everyone here was a corpse. Since someone had managed to defeat so many dead people, then that someone must be a spirit source host. However, the guy wasn't sure if that someone was still here or had already left this place. After reaching one of the doors, he knocked in a hurry and tried to see if anyone was still alive there. He asked if anyone could hear him. Suddenly, he found a key lying on the floor next to the door. It even seemed to him that it was exactly the same key as his. Inserting the key into the keyhole and cranking it, he opened the door. Behind the door, he found a bearded man with a hugely battered and torn t-shirt. The man was lying on his back, looking at the baseball bat. The guy thought that the man must have used it to deal with all those undead. Looking at the man with the peeping rune, Sui noticed that the rune did not identify the man as a walking corpse. Perhaps a monster stronger than a giant frog had appeared in this place and had torn this man apart with its sharp claws. If Su Yi had hurriedly arrived earlier, he might have been able to save the man. However, deciding that the past could not be recovered, he decided to inherit the man's weapon and continue fighting. As soon as he picked up the bat, then with the help of the peeping rune, he accidentally discovered something. That something was hiding behind a bookcase. He didn't realize what was even there. Finding the door, swallowing the lump in his throat, he opened the door with all his determination and swung his bat. However, what he found there completely shocked him. After all, there was a little girl hiding behind the door. It seems that the father had defended his child to the last, but lost in this battle with the zombies. How did they end up locked in the apartment and with the key on the other side? Would Su Yi find someone else? And many other questions arose. Unfortunately, we don't find out what happened next, as the author seems to have decided not to continue his story any further, and ended it very quickly. And that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you would like to see a sequel, please like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your wishes in the comments. You can also subscribe to Telegram to know about new videos. Bye everybody.